Hey everyone, it's Ethan. My Star Trek videos are some of the most popular videos on my channel. So in 2020, I have decided to make them somewhat of a focus, to put out more of these talking head opinion Star Trek videos. Oh, hold on. There we go. To put out more of these videos in 2020 where we just talk about Star Trek and we talk about the politics of Star Trek and we talk about Star Trek episodes. So the Politics of Star Trek series will be ongoing throughout the year, and we will be talking about Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard. Each episode, as it comes out, I will be reviewing. And I brought along props. I've got some ships here because we're going to talk about the story. I've got Captain Picard. He's here joining us. While I don't have Star Trek Discovery Spock, I do have young and old Spock. And so they will be stand-ins for Spock as we need to talk about Spock. And I'm wearing my Discovery shirt because as we talk today about Star Trek Picard, I think it's important that we keep Star Trek Discovery in mind and what has gone on with Star Trek Discovery. I'm going to do a little bit of a recap of Star Trek Discovery, not super in-depth. I want to keep in mind Star Trek Discovery and what has happened with the series, because the same people, some of the same people who brought us Star Trek Discovery are going to bring us Star Trek Picard. Let's talk about the setting first. So the setting with Star Trek Discovery is a prequel. I've never been a big fan of prequels because I feel like it narrows the storytelling down. You already know how this is all going to end up. And a lot of times in narrative, when it's just about putting the pieces in place of how did this person get to this place, if that becomes too much of the narrative, it gets boring. That's my problem with the prequels, the Star Wars prequels as well. We already knew that Anakin was going to grow up and become Darth Vader. And seeing the process of him growing up and becoming Darth Vader takes the air out of it a little bit. There's not as much wind in the sails when we know he ends up as Luke and Leia's father and he ends up as Darth Vader. He's going to do a bunch of evil shit and then he's going to become Darth Vader someday. We already know that going in, right? This is the USS Kelvin, by the way. There you go. If I can, wrong way. This is the USS Kelvin from Star Trek 2009. My big problem with the new 3 Star Trek movies, and Star Trek Beyond, by the way, is probably my favorite Star Trek movie of all time. It's right up there for me with the motion picture in Star Trek 6 and Insurrection. I'm sorry, not Insurrection, First Contact. Those are the top, right? Those are the top tier of Star Trek movies. But Star Trek 2009, while it was cool to see the USS Kelvin and how George Kirk died just as baby Kirk was born, the establishment of the USS Kelvin timeline was interesting. It's always a disappointment for a franchise like Star Trek when you go backwards, especially since we haven't really seen what's happening in the future since the end of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Now, I know that Voyager ended after Deep Space Nine, but Voyager was still in the Delta Quadrant, right? It didn't get home until the final episode. And you got some pieces thrown in, very like throwaway lines from the episodes where they were contacting home, with Barclay, and you had Counselor Troy in there, and you had the episodes with Admiral Paris and Pathfinder and everything. So there were little tiny tidbits that the war was over or whatever, but it's really been since the end of Star Trek Deep Space Nine since we know what's going on in the future. And that was over 20 years ago. In 2009, when they said, yeah, we're going to go back and tell you the same story you've already seen, except it's in a different timeline, but then we're going to make the second movie basically Star Trek II retold. My point is, my favorite thing about Star Trek Picard is that we're finally going to see what happened next. Finally, after more than 20 years, we get to know the next step. And I think that is a huge win. And I'm very, very thankful about that. I have problems, though, with what I've seen so far. If you're going to bring Captain Picard back, and it's good to have you back, sir, there's only a few ways to do that, right? While Picard was the main, he wasn't necessarily the lead. Picard was a private man. The big emotional moment of the final episode of Star Trek The Next Generation was that Captain Picard was gonna go hang out with his friends. We all saw that as a big step. That was huge. Captain Picard's gonna play poker with his friends. This isn't someone who takes huge emotional steps, right? Star Trek is at its best when it's about the characters developing, when the characters learn a lesson, and through them learning a lesson or making a choice, we can learn about ourselves and we can relate to the choice that they have to make, or we can relate to the situation that they're in, and we can get our own moral development from their moral development. So Picard is not somebody who takes huge emotional steps. When he and Riker parted in Star Trek Nemesis, as Riker was going to finally command his own ship and their relationship was finally ending, he shook his hand. While I think that he can work as the main, we haven't really seen him work as the lead. There were singular episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation where he did work more as a lead, but those were huge emotional steps. Like when he got tortured by a Cardassian, or when he was assimilated by the Borg. And I don't think that he's the lead of that episode. Riker's the lead of that episode. Because Picard just gets assimilated by the Borg. And he spends 1.5 episodes as Locutus. And he doesn't really do anything that drives us emotionally. He just says, I'm Locutus of Borg. Resistance is futile. I think that Sisko was more of a lead for Star Trek Deep Space Nine than Picard was a lead for Star Trek The Next Generation. Or even Janeway as a lead for Voyager, or even Archer as a lead for Enterprise. And maybe even Kirk as the original series. I would argue that Picard was the weakest lead of any series because The Next Generation was more of an ensemble piece. They're all ensemble pieces, for sure. But Picard wasn't really always the driving force of The Next Generation. It was more usually about one of the other characters having some sort of development and Picard being the anchor around which everyone orbited. You get my meaning. That is my biggest concern for a series that centers around Picard. In order for Picard as a character to work, unless they make a lot of changes to the character, which is possible, he will need a very strong ensemble around him, because we're about to talk about fan service. And so far in the trailers and previews, there's been a lot of it. They tease Jerry Ryan, they tease Brent Spiner, they tease Jonathan Frakes, and they tease Marina Sirtis. I'm very happy to see all of them. Don't get me wrong, I'm very, very happy to see all of them. But none of them are going to, as far as what I understand, be a series regular. They are there to make cameo appearances and to give us a frame of reference. I see Data on the screen, and I know how Data is predictably going to respond to a situation. I know how 7 of 9 is probably going to respond to a situation. This 7 of 9, although seems like she's more emotional. There was an episode of Star Trek Voyager where her cortical implant was malfunctioning because she was feeling too many emotions, and so her implant was shutting down, and that was killing her. I guess maybe that situation has been rectified. It's kind of something that doesn't need to be explained. It's like, yeah, I got over it. I'm not a person that needs a lot of explanation, but it would be interesting to see what explanation they try to give. While I am hopeful that Star Trek Picard is good, I'm worried that it won't be. And that is because of Alex Kurtzman. Alex Kurtzman wrote The Amazing Spider-Man 2. He helped pen the story for Star Trek 2009, which wasn't a great story and had Spock standing on a moon, a Vulcan.
Tell me how your planet Vulcan looks on a lazy evening when the moon is full.
Vulcan has no moon, Miss Uhura.
Watching Vulcan explode, or implode.
Vulcan has no moon, Miss Uhura.
Yeah. Now, I know that there have been reports that his involvement has been lessened with Discovery and Picard. I don't know how true that is or isn't. The second season of Discovery did not finish very strong for me. I felt the story really fell apart. The story itself was rather silly, that they were seeing people turn on red lights from across the galaxy, which isn't how light works. Light can only travel at light speed. And if you're more than a light year away, then it would be more than a year before you saw the light turn on. And for somebody to be like, yeah, there's 9 red lights on that someone just turned on around the galaxy, which they could have explained with a throwaway line saying they're subspace signals, right? There's these 9 subspace signals that we can't explain. And there you go. Then it explains it. But when they said they're 9 red lights, it breaks one of the most widely understood laws of physics, is the speed of light. It's that kind of extra step that they don't take with Discovery that makes me worry about Star Trek Picard, that those extra steps won't be taken. Do you see how much easily I explained the signals by just saying they were subspace signals instead of saying they're 9 red lights or 7, 9, I forget even what it was. The other thing that Discovery does that I don't want Picard to do is that they forcibly invoke huge emotional moments that they haven't earned. If Picard does that too, it's going to make me a little sad. I didn't relate to any of them because the storytelling, the pacing was off with Discovery. A whole bunch of things would happen and then nothing would happen. And then a bunch of things would happen and then nothing would happen. And then, oh, by the way, we've solved everything. That kind of storytelling worked with episodic television. With serial storytelling, the pacing matters more. And oh, my phone is vibrating. I was like, what is that noise? It's a telemarketer. In serial storytelling, pacing is paramount. Do you see what I did there? I didn't do that on purpose, actually. Pacing is paramount with serial storytelling. Discovery hasn't done it right. I have been coming down on Discovery a lot in this video. And I want to say, I don't hate Discovery. It's fine. I don't love Discovery. It's not my favorite Star Trek series by far, nor is it the best Star Trek series in any way, shape, or form. It's fine. Like, I don't hate it. It's okay. Here's my big problem with Discovery. Let me just get into this real quick. By the way, this is a huge spoiler. If you haven't seen Discovery and you don't want any spoilers, don't watch this next few seconds. You're going to tell me that the reason that Spock, old Spock, young Spock, 2009 Spock, Kelvin Spock, whatever Spock, never mentioned that he had an adopted sister from Earth is because it's classified. Look how old he is there. Okay, he's like 200 years old or something. Never mentioned it. Sarek mind melded with Captain Picard. Sarek, Spock's daddy, mind melded with Captain Picard when Sarek was going nuts. Do you remember that? And Picard never picked up that Sarek had a daughter, an adopted daughter from Earth. Just never came up. I don't hate Discovery, but the writers ask us to accept a lot for the storytelling to make sense. And I'm afraid that they're going to do the same thing with Picard. That things are going to happen. There's this tired trope in storytelling. This person is the chosen one, and if we can just do whatever we need to do, they won't destroy everything, right? That sort of used to be fresh. It's not anymore. This strange female that we don't know who she is now that character, is the something. What do they call it in the trailer? She's the end of all?
She has no idea what she truly is.
She's the end of all. She's the destroyer.
Or something. And it's like, okay. All right. It's okay. Sure. I hope that they don't screw this whole thing up, but I'm afraid they might. And I will review every single episode shortly after it airs is the plan. We'll talk about them as they happen. I'm going to do the same thing with Discovery. And probably the same thing with Lower Decks too. As the episodes come out, after the episodes come out a couple of days, I'll do a video. And as the series progresses, we'll sit down, we'll talk about it, we'll have a conversation, and then we'll do a season recap once the season has ended. Listen, I want Picard to be great. I want it to be great. Star Trek needs something great right now. Not just good, we need something great. Star Trek Beyond was great. It was great. It's, like I said, it might be my favorite Star Trek film of all time. It's right up there with the motion picture, with Star Trek 6, and with First Contact for me. It's right up there at the top. We can, in the modern day, create really great Star Trek. That hasn't happened yet with Discovery. Discovery's not awful, but it's messy. Maybe it's not messy, but it's a mess. And Picard, I am hoping, will be better. We'll see. Please like the video if you liked it. If you're new here, consider subscribing. If you enjoy the content that I do and would like to support me, consider becoming a Patreon patron. For as little as $1 a month, you can help me create more content at patreon.com/asaprogressiveliberal. You'll become a free radical and get special permissions on the Discord, get to help me decide what videos I make next. I want to thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Thanks, everybody.